Very good morning or evening as the case may be. For all of you joining from around the world on the Classic Polytechnic. Welcoming you to our fifth live webinar for 2016. This webinar series is brought to you by the Singapore Training and Development Association, better known as STADA here in Singapore, and the Center for Transcultural Studies at Temasek Polytechnic. With webinars, we seek to create a platform for knowledge sharing by connecting thought leaders from around the world. I'd like to start today with a quote by Mark Twain that good judgment is the result of experience. Experience is the result of bad judgment. Now, at some point, each of us as a leader faces moments that we'd like to forget. When we realize that our judgment isn't perfect. Every leader, worth his or her salt, will give us a so-called psychological kick in the backside eventually. Now, it's these moments that we want to talk about today, these moments that can be a starting point for leader to move to the next stage. And here to talk to us about these moments, we have with us today Bill Treasurer. Bill's the CEO, that's Chief Encouragement Officer of Giant Leap Consulting. Bill has designed leadership and succession programs for emerging and experienced leaders for NASA, Pacific Avenue, EX Bank, Ocean Construction, Tanks, Professional Sports Team, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and many others. He's the author of international bestseller, Courage Goes to Work, which introduced the new management practice of courage building. His book, Leaders Open Doors, became the #1 leadership training book on Amazon. Incidentally, all royalties from that book, Leaders Open Doors, are donated to programs that support children with special needs. And to date, Bill and his book have raised over $20,000 in donations. During today's webinar, Bill will discuss some concepts introduced in his newest book, A Leadership Kick in the Ass, which emphasizes that our most enduring and transformative leadership lessons come not from our triumphs, but from our wipeouts. A bit interesting take on this. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the mic over to Bill Treasurer to take us through today's presentation. So welcome, Bill.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Justin. What a terrific introduction. And I'm so delighted and honored to be able to speak with all of you today. I'm especially honored that STADA has invited me to do this along with Temasek Polytechnic. It's a great partnership. I have to say, a few years back, I did a keynote at STADA, and I always value the nice trophy that I got for doing that keynote event. I always keep it on my shelf. So it's good to be back with all of you. There's a lot of different folks coming to today's webinar. Many people from Singapore, of course, where I've been a couple of times and I really enjoy it when I go there. I know we've got some people also attending in from India, from Malaysia, and so in the Asian Pacific Rim. So I'm really just delighted to be able to spend time with you today, introducing you to some new concepts from my new book, A Leadership Kick in the Ass. And I have to say right from the get-go that this book is informed by the last dozen years. My company has been around now. We're in the 16th year. I've been a practitioner of leadership development now for over 20 years. I don't like to call myself a leadership expert. It seems a little highbrow to do that. I kind of think of myself as a leadership plumber because I go to the job site every single day. I work with leaders. I roll up my sleeves and I help them remove any hairballs from their leadership pipes. And in the last dozen years, I've been working with unionized construction companies in Chicago. And when I say a leadership kick in the ass, that's how they talk. So I may not be talking like a university professor today, but I am speaking like my clients. And my clients have taught me so much about leadership. And I bring what they teach me, and then I bring them to folks like yourself. And I think that, and I hope that this information that I share with you today will resonate on some level. We talk about leaders a lot, and we always sort of put them on a pedestal. And I do a lot in the area of leadership development. I do comprehensive leadership development programs. Sometimes they're multi-year in nature. And what I found is that many times the most enduring, transformative, and powerful lessons that a leader gets aren't from a workshop, aren't from a book. It's from significant failures that they've had to endure that then it tests their leadership. And if they follow the whole arc of the story, they can come out of that experience a more authentic, genuine leader who knows who they are. and they get a wonderful blend of what we would call confidence and humility, which I'll introduce you to as we go into today's webinar. I'm going to, in a minute here, I'm going to pull up the slides. So I'm going to share my screen, and you're not going to see me for a good portion of time as I go into the slides. And then at the end of the webinar, I'll come back out so that I can interact with you. I find that so much of the learning happens real time when we do the Q&A. But I'm going to go ahead and screen share with you now. Hopefully this will work okay. All right. Is it sharing okay? Good.
Yep,
so
you can go into presenter mode. We see your screen.
Oh,
there we go.
Perfect. Okay, great. And Justin, let me know if it for any reason we have any technical glitches along the way. Please let me know.
No,
but I want to start by sharing a story from my neck of the woods. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, not far from the Cherokee Indian Reservation. It's the largest number of Cherokee Indians in the United States, north, sort of east of the Mississippi. And there's an old Cherokee story that I'd like to share with you. And it's about an elder Cherokee grandfather, and he's speaking to his young Cherokee grandson. And he says, "Grandson, there's a very big fight going on inside of me. There's a big fight. There's two wolves and they're fighting. One wolf is dark. He represents ego and anger and resentment and short fuse and temper and all of the darkness that's inside of me. The other wolf represents lightness. He represents selflessness, looking good and out for others, developing others and lifting them up. He represents joy that's inside of you. And there's a big fight going on between these two wolves. And these two wolves, you have the same fight going on inside of you. And in fact, every human being on the earth has this fight between the two wolves going on." And the young grandson looks at the elder and says, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the elder grandfather says, "The wolf you feed." I think that's a great story because it really gets to the essence of humanity, that we are full of goodness and we have the potential to be tempted out of that goodness and compromise it. And that is true of leaders too. We put leaders on a pedestal, and yet they're human beings, and they have the potential to use leadership for good, and they have the potential to use leadership for bad. The first lesson I want to share with you is the first law of leadership. The first law of leadership is this: leadership is not about you, the leader. Leadership is about those being led. The focus of leadership is not the self. The focus of leadership is on creating opportunities for others to help the organization grow and to help people grow. The best of leadership is when we can use the light wolf instead of our dark wolf. And yet both exist inside of us. I'm going to drop into a quick question here that I want to ask you webinar attendees. And the question is this: on a scale ranging from 1 to 100, what % of your talents did the best leader you ever worked for use? So if you think of your talents, your skills, aptitude, and ability, what % of your talents, ranging from 1 to 100, would you say that the best leader you ever worked for used? And if you're there sitting next to somebody, maybe you can share your number. Hopefully it's a whole number. Hopefully it's not like 63.6, but pick a whole number and share your number with somebody next to you, or at least jot it down. Now I want you to think of the same question but in reverse. On a scale ranging from 1 to 100, what % of your talents did the worst leader you ever worked for use? What I find many times is that the leader that gets the most out of us is somebody that we end up really admiring, and we look at them as being the best quote unquote leader. Now, sometimes a bad leader will get performance out of you because you're afraid not to perform for that bad leader. But my friends Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, who many of you know, wrote the book called The Leadership Challenge, which is in the 5th edition. It's a leadership classic. And they just came out with a new book called Learning Leadership. They've asked these questions of many people, and there's actually an average that they've come up with. And the average bad leader, people say, only gets 31% of their talents out of them. Now, some of you may have been higher, but my guess is that many of you are actually lower. Some of you might have put down 10%, for example. So the bad leaders that we work for don't get much out of us. Now, the good leader, the average good leader, gets 95% of our talents out of us. So now I rewind back to this idea of the good wolf and the bad wolf. If you care about profits, if you care about shareholder value, if you care about performance of people, why would you use the worst of you if it's going to bring out the worst in others or not get enough out of them? So using your good leadership can draw out, and you become the best leader for somebody, draws out more of them and they perform better and you get more out of them. So to me, it's sort of a practical equation. In the new book, A Leadership Kick in the Ass, I talk a lot about the ego balance, because I think that the highest aspiration of leadership is confidence and humility, but that we also have to guard our ego and manage it well, because it ranges from self-absorption when it comes to leadership. A lot of leaders are all about themselves, are about what are they going to get out of it, are about trying to amass more power for themselves, or more stature for themselves, or more money for themselves. A lot of times leadership can slip into self-absorption. On the other hand, many leaders that I work for are running so ragged, they work so long, they work on weekends and late at night, that they become self-neglectful, where they're so attending to other people that they don't attend to their own soul and themselves. So in between this place of self-absorption or self-neglect, and the operative word being self, is this middle place, self-respect, where a leader has confidence and humility, and we need both. We want leaders to be strong and have backbone and be assertive, and we want leaders to not lose sight of their roots, to not be show-offs, and to not be stuck up, and to remember that we're the focus of leadership. We want leaders who are confident, yes, but we want leaders that are humble too. And it starts with self-respect. Now, if you don't have those things, if you moved towards self-absorption, or if you move towards self-neglect, you're in danger of the 2 leadership dysfunctions that we should all avoid. I know a lot of us have heard different leadership styles. Ken Blanchard talks about the 4 different styles of leadership associated with the life cycle of leadership, situational leadership, like directive leadership, for example, or supportive leadership. You may have heard of other types of leadership. The type that you don't want to be, the type that many different leaders slip into, are these dichotomous leaders. On the one hand, the self-absorbed leader that is all about themselves, stubbornly about themselves, that I call pigheads. And on the other hand, towards self-neglect, leaders who never look out for themselves are weaklings. So these are the 2 leaders you don't want to be. And I'll share a story about each one of these, pigheads and weaklings. First, the pighead. I once was doing a leadership I was once part of a leadership workshop, where I'm getting a little bit of an echo now, but I was once part of a leadership workshop where I was part of a panel, and one of the panelists is a CEO. And before he came into the room, somebody said to me, watch out for this guy. His ego walks into the room 30 minutes before he does. Sure enough, he waltzed in 15 minutes late, holding up the meeting. And then when he got there, he bragged about how he had just left the meeting and manhandled the board of directors. He bragged about the risks that he was taking that his predecessor didn't have the guts to take. he talked about how he liked to hire people from his own family because he knew that they had the right DNA. And then to top it off, at the end of the meeting, he gave everybody a copy of his favorite book of quotations. And the only person quoted in the book was himself. This leader was oblivious to how repulsive his oversized ego was. He had confidence all the way. In fact, he had overconfidence. He was a pighead. What he didn't have was any humility at all. He had no recognition of decorum and protocol and the fact that you should have decency and acknowledge the other people in the room beside his gigantic ego. Now, some of you, that might resonate. You might know a pighead leader that you work with. I hope not, but most of us by this stage in life have met a pig-headed leader. Typically, you'll see it in their stubbornness. You often see it in their my way or the highway sort of approach. Now, on the other hand, so that's an overconfident leader. You don't want to be that one. On the other hand, you have the weakling leader. And the weakling is someone who doesn't pay attention to themselves, who lacks backbone and confidence, and who doesn't stick up for themselves, and therefore they're not really capable of sticking up for other people as well. I recently worked with the CFO of a company, a construction company, and he had a senior member on his team that wanted to be in the CFO role. She was really very, very talented. She was a master at numbers and finance and accounting. And yet she was obnoxious and she couldn't take people along with her. She used intimidation and fear to make people do the things that she needed to have done. And she was, frankly, she was wanting the position of the CFO himself. And the CFO didn't have the guts to fire her. First of all, he was afraid that if he fired her, that he would be left shorthanded. But by holding on to this person, who none of his peer senior executives could stand, nor her own direct reports could stand, and by not firing her, it weakened his leadership because he was no longer seen as credible in the eyes of the workforce. Now, eventually, things got so intolerable that his own credibility was so much at stake that he finally told her that she's not going to become the CFO, and he removed her from a leadership development program that she was part of, and she self-selected out of the organization. It was as close as the weakling leader could get to actually firing her. It was his, he tried to gain more confidence by doing it in a different way. So, but that's an example of a weakling leader. And pigheads and weaklings are kind of common in the workplace. What I think, so it goes back to that continuum that I showed you a moment ago. What you want is this middle place. You don't want to be overly confident where everything is all about you, and you don't want to lack confidence where nothing is about you and you're too weak to do anything. Where you need to situate yourself is to have a right-sized ego in the middle place, to have a good balance of healthy ego in the form of confidence and healthy ego in the form of humility. I call this what happens to you if you end up overconfident or underconfident. You get a reverberation that is really self-induced that I call a transformative humiliation. And that is a positive behavioral change resulting from the psychological pain of embarrassment. Because if you are overly confident, at some point you're going to be humbled. There's an old saying in the Bible, pride cometh before the fall. The ancient Greek story of Icarus flying too close to the sun, and then his wings melt and he crashes to the ground. This idea that if you have too much ego, eventually it will catch up to you, and you will, by your own making, have a humiliating event. And this is true too of weakling leaders, that if they are too weak for too long, they will become irrelevant because you have to get results as a leader. So it too can have a reverberation. The good news is that this can be a good thing. It may be painful, like a kick in the rump that you see there, But when you get humbled, you get humble. You can't get humility without experiencing humiliation. The word humility comes from the word humiliation. So this becomes a good thing if you allow it. Now stay with me, because I know that this is controversial and some of you might be, you're not yet sure, but hang on until the end of the webinar. Now, one of my clients is this guy. He's Clint Hurdle. He's the coach of the Pittsburgh Pirates, a professional Major League Baseball team here in the United States. And just as an aside, if you happen to be a baseball fan, right now, the World Series is going on. This is a gigantic thing, and it's the 7th game of the World Series. Tonight will decide who will be the World Series champion. Clint Hurdle's not in it. His team was out earlier in the season. But Clint Hurdle's a good guy, and he wrote the foreword to my new book, A Leadership Kick in the Ass, and he's the perfect person to have written that foreword of the book. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in the United States, and he was listed as America's Next Phenom when he was 20 years old. They saw in him a bright future, but he was only 20, and he got into the major leagues. And he started hanging out with the older guys, and the older guys wanted to show him a good time and would take him out after the ball game and go and get beer in the bars and that kind of stuff. And after a while, he took his whole career down the drain through alcohol abuse. Now, he was able to redeem himself. He started as an assistant coach, and 20 years later, he's in the 12-step program. He hasn't had a drink in almost 20 years. And he was the perfect guy to write the foreword of my book, because he epitomizes this idea of transformative humiliation. He, through his own behavior as a leader, brought about his own demise. And when he put himself back together more authentically, more genuinely strong, more confident, and now humbled, he was able to be a stronger and better leader. He says in the first sentence of the book, there are 2 kinds of leaders: those who have been humbled and those who are about to be. No leader gets to escape this inevitable experience of getting humbled at some point. All leaders worth their salt will experience a humiliating failure at some point, or a big mistake that is of their own making, a blunder. We try to avoid it, but it's unavoidable in the course of a career of a leader. The good news is, as I said, it can be the impetus for tremendous, enduring, powerful, and transformative leadership change. When it works, you get what I call a holy shift. A holy shift. And the shift is from, you start from a place of, when you were early on in your career, of how can I be more successful as a leader? What can I get for myself? But once you get humbled, either by overconfidence or underconfidence of your own making, once you get humbled, the shift is no longer about how can I be successful? It's about what can I do as a leader to help you become successful? Not how can I excel, but how can I help you excel? It's a shift away from yourself towards the other folks. It's a shift away from selfishness to service. The best of a leader is when they're serving others. Leaders need followers more than followers need leaders. A leader is successful when they help followers become successful. In fact, a leader can't be successful unless followers are successful. So unless you make a holy shift away from yourself and towards the people you're leading, how can you possibly be a good leader that you were meant to be? So after the holy shift, when you're on the other side, when you've already experienced your painful event, where you've now gained wisdom, you have the stripes of, you've earned the good judgment by all of the bad judgment that you've shown. Now you are the leader that you were meant to be. After the holy shift, here are some characteristics of the leader who's made the holy shift. First of all, he knows what his values is. Or it says here, she embodies her values. She knows what her values are, and she sticks to them and embodies them. She's focused on helping others be successful. She's really conscious of her gifts. She knows what they are. She's confident in them, And she knows when she takes those gifts too far, they start to cast a shadow, and she knows what her limitations are. She's keenly observant and listens deeply, because when you listen deeply, you show people that they're really valued. People are not just resources to her, they're human beings that work for her, and she needs to understand what makes them tick, what their interests are, and what they want to get out of the experience of being led by her. She shares lessons from her failures and her mistakes so that other people don't have to make the same ones, and so that she shows people that she is real. She gets that she's successful when she helps others become successful, and she's a wonderful balanced blend of confidence and humility. Now, once you get to that place, you've made the holy shift, and you're in the middle place of confidence and humility at self-respect. Here's 3 expressions of that you can sort of ways that you can tell that a leader is confidently humble and in the right measure. First of all, they're now capable of being what I would call a loyal rebel. We want a loyal rebel. We want a leader who is loyal to the organization and to us, and yet doesn't just toe the party line all the time, doesn't just say the buzzword bingos that every other leader in the company says, that is capable of independent and sometimes rebellious thought and action. I'll give you an example. When I worked at Accenture, one of the world's largest management consulting companies, a $30 billion company, I worked for a guy named Heinz Brannon. Heinz was a managing partner, and when he took over for the Charlotte office, he came in after his predecessor went on to become the CEO of the company. Now, that CEO used to religiously have Saturday morning meetings of his partners, because it was the only time that that CEO, he went on to become the CEO, it was the only time that that managing partner could get his partners together, because they traveled all week, and he wanted to have a status meeting. So it was every Saturday morning. Now imagine you're putting blood and sweat and tears and performance into the company, and now the company wants a Saturday extraction from you every single Saturday too, and you got kids at home. So Heinz Brannon, the guy who would end up becoming my boss, Heinz was this wonderful blend, is this wonderful blend of confidence and humility. He's not just going to toe the party line because that's what other leaders did before him, but he's loyal to the company and he's loyal to the partners. So he mobilized them when he became the managing partner of the Charlotte office, and his first official act was to mobilize the Saturday morning men's meeting, the Saturday morning partners meeting. And his first words were, "I want you all to know that this is the last Saturday morning partner meeting that you will ever attend while I'm leader here." Now, how do you think that they all reacted? They literally stood up and clapped. They could tell that he was not just going to be loyal to the company in a blind way, that his loyalty was actually demonstrated by the sanity of making sure that people were spending time with their family in the time on the weekends so that they would be more productive for the company when they came back after the weekend. He was loyal and rebellious at the same time because he was confident and humble. When you're confident and humble, you're also capable of being a velvet hammer. Leaders have to be able to communicate with people in a way that gets through to people. Now, a lot of blockhead, pig-headed leaders, the ones that are all about themselves with oversized egos, are all hammer. They even pride themselves on being, quote, brutally honest. They use brutality in their language. They want to intimidate people to get things done by being not just assertive, but aggressive. So they're all hammer. But what you want is to make sure that that leader's got, yes, some confidence of the hammer, but you need the humility and the diplomacy of velvet, because what you say has to be matched against how you say it. When you communicate as a leader, you're not supposed to just bludgeon people. If you bludgeon people, you'll just build resentments among the people that you're leading. And then they'll go home that night and kick their dog. We want a leader who can get through to people. And that means they've got to be assertive, yes. They have to be truth tellers, yes. They have to be candid, yes. And they have to have diplomacy and grace. And those are things that humility gives you. Thirdly, when you've got genuine humility and confidence, you can be what I call a genuine faker. There's a lot been written lately about the idea of leaders being authentic. We talk about authenticity a lot. You probably have read some articles on authenticity. I'm big onto authenticity. Look, you've heard me in this webinar. I speak real, right? So I think authenticity needs to be held at a premium. That said, leaders are in a role when they're in the leadership role. And when you're in a role, sometimes you have to give a performance of the role. This is the idea of executive presence, for example. Now, here's how a genuine faker works. So one of my clients is a guy named Mike Callahan. He's one of the Chicago construction company senior executives I work for. He's a grizzled veteran in the workforce. He's been around for a long time. He literally has a gravelly voice when he talks. And Mike tells a story when he got early on in his leadership. He was leading about 5 people. And then he helped put together a construction bid for one of the largest jobs in Chicago at that time. And if they would win the bid, it meant his company was going to be leading the largest project that it had ever won before. And Mike spent hours, along with his team of 5 people, putting together the answer response to the bid. And he was there when they pulled back the paper and showed that at the Department of Transportation, they were pulling the bids and they were showing which one was the winner. And sure enough, Mike's bid was the winner. And his company, Aldridge Electric Company, said, you know what, Mike, you've had so much involvement with this bid. We want you to lead the project. That meant Mike was going to go from a team of 5 people, the most he had ever led before, to 80 people. 16 times larger than he had ever led before. And as he tells it, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was freaking out. I said, Mike, did you freak out? What'd your people think? He goes, well, I couldn't let them know I was freaking out. And he's right. When you're a leader, you have to demonstrate composure on the outside that might be at odds with what you're feeling on the inside. So we talk about authenticity, and that's great. But sometimes you have to fake it in front of your people. Sometimes you have to fake it until you make it as a leader. You have to act as if you're the leader you want to become before you are actually the leader. Sometimes we think that we can think our way into becoming somebody else, but it doesn't work that way. You behave your way into thinking differently. Mike had to act as the leader he wanted to be before he could become and think like the leader he wanted to be. He was scared on the inside, but had to demonstrate and portray confidence on the outside. The fact that he had confidence, but also humility, and especially the humility, allowed him to be an authentic, genuine faker. Sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. So what we're talking about is what Aretha Franklin said in her famous song, I just want a little bit of RESPECT, respect. We want leaders that are full of respect for themselves and for others. And here's how it works if you were to put it together in a quadrant model. If you're a leader that doesn't respect other people, but only respects yourself, that makes you a pig-headed leader. And I kind of feel sorry for you if you're that way. Now, the good news is it's going to have a consequence. At some point in time, you will flame out and your ego will get in your own way and you will move out of that pig-headedness because humility will come your way. On the other hand, if you're all about respecting other people, but you don't have any self-respect at all for yourself, you're a weakling and you're not going to get results. And after a while, you're going to become irrelevant. And that's the worst thing you can be as a leader because you don't get results. And after a while, people won't pick you for leadership positions. What you want is somebody who respects themselves and who respects others equally, in equal measure. that I respect you and I respect me. That's a good leader. And what about the leader that doesn't respect himself and doesn't respect others? Well, that's just pathetic. I feel bad for that person. So I want to leave you with 3 tips, and then I'm going to open it up. Can't wait to get your reactions to this material, because this is new material. And I have to tell you, there is so much more in the book. I had to sort of boil it up into a 45 minutes worth of webinar and allowing for 15 minutes of Q&A. So in fact, this book has more content than any of the books that I've written before. But I'm going to share with you 3 final tips that I'd like you to think about. And they're ways that I think of pulling in some confidence and humility for yourself. The first is define the leader you want to be. Not the leader as you exist today, but as the leader that you need to be to meet the needs of the future. The leader that you would be proud to be led by yourself. The leader that other people need you to be. The good wolf leader. What would that future self leader look like? I'm a proponent of having a leadership journal. If you're in a leadership role, or if you're aspiring to be a leader, I encourage you to start journaling. And when you come into situations such as the one I mentioned with Heinz Brannon or with Mike Callahan, if you see something that you think is worthy of a story or a lesson, jot it down. Or if you notice something about yourself, or if somebody gives you feedback about yourself, jot it down in your leadership journal. But constantly be refining this future self of the leader that you were meant to become, and then start taking the actions to get you there. Secondly, I think every single one of us needs to appoint a chief ego deflator, a CED. Everybody needs to have a chief ego deflator. I'll share with you a quick story from my own life. A couple of years ago, when my most recent leadership book came out, not the new one, but the one before that, called Leaders Open Doors, I was being very fortunate to get a lot of speaking engagements. And I was opening up T&D magazine, which all of you from STADA will know is from ATD, has T&D magazine. And I went in T&D magazine, and I was about 8 pages in, and there was a picture of me. I was speaking at a conference, and it said, Bill Treasurer's going to be speaking at our conference. And I went down about 10 more pages into there, looked at a couple of articles, and I came across another advertisement, and I was in that advertisement with my picture too. Now you can imagine what it did for my ego. I had a huge inflated ego like a big balloon, and I walked upstairs to my kitchen getting ready to brag to my wife, and I took the T&D magazine and I turned it to page 8 and I pointed at it and I said, honey, look at that. I'm on page 8 of T&D. And she goes, and I said, hey, wait, I'm not done. And I turned 10 more pages. I said, honey, look at that. I'm on page 22 here too. And my wife looked at me in that way that only a wife or spouse can look at you, with the universal look of disgust that all married people have experienced. And she said the words that brought me back to reality. She said, go clip your nose hairs. That's actually literally the words that came out of her mouth, was go clip your nose hairs. And suddenly my ego came back down to proportion that it needed to be. My spouse is fantastic about not letting me get over my skis. She's good about when I come home and I slay the world and I go give a talk to 300 people. When I come home, I'm just another member of the house. She'll open the door, hand me the garbage, and say, bring it up to the garbage can. A few days ago, I was on a television interview, and she still hasn't looked at it because she kind of doesn't have any interest in looking at it. And I kind of like that. It gives me a relief to not have to always be oversized and embellished. And when I'm around her, I can just be a level self. She's good at leveling my ego. Now, I got to say, she's a chief ego deflator, but she's also a chief ego inflator when I need it too. She's the one who gave me the guts to start my own company. She's the one who believes in me when I'm down and who cheers me on when I need it too. So she helps keep my ego in check. Everybody should have a chief ego deflator. Finally, I want to share with you this tip, and it's sort of a simple one. I get to work with a lot of emerging leaders, and a lot of times new leaders. I got one guy, for example, I'm working with that's getting ready to, his father is the owner of the company. It's a $500 million company, and his father is getting ready to turn the ownership over to the sons. And one of his sons is just over the cusp of 30 years old. And people are pressuring him, and he feels pressure to live into the shoes of his father, who had created such a large footprint. And people are giving him too much mentoring. And he tells me, he says, Bill, I'm getting confused. I don't even know where to start. I'm getting all of this advice. I want to be a good leader, but one person's telling me this, the other person's telling me that. I'm not sure who to be as a leader. My only advice to him, and it would be to any new leader, and frankly, it would be my advice to every leader, is if you want to be a good leader, start by being a good person. Start with your integrity. Start with your own character. Live in a way that's clean. Constantly do the next right thing. What does it mean? Make sure that you do an occasional kick review, meaning allow people to give you feedback about yourself, such as inviting a 360-degree feedback, for example. Make sure that you're getting some input as to the leader that you're being. The kick review would be, think back to your career when you've been humbled. Is there a time when you've been humbled? Is there a mistake that you made that you felt embarrassed about, that you felt a certain sense of embarrassment? Because again, that can be the source of, and what did you learn from that embarrassment? I'll tell you a quick story that I hadn't planned on telling. I came home this evening after spending time with my wife and my in-laws, and there was a burning smell in the house. And we have a babysitter because I have a daughter who has special needs. And so the babysitter said, you know, I smelled, there's a very bad burning smell in the house. And I went outside and I said to my boys, have you been burning something? And the boys are like, no, we smelled it too. Nothing, Dad, no. And so we smelled around the house. And then finally I found where some matches had been burnt, oversized matches, and they were put in a waste paper basket in my wife's in our bedroom. And so I knew that one of my sons had done it, and I knew which son did it. And I called my son up to me. His name is Ian. He's the one who inspired my last book, by the way, Leaders Open Doors. And I said, Ian, I want you to look in my eyes. I said, there are empty matches in Mom's garbage can. I need you to tell me right now if you lit those. His lips started quivering. His eyes got all watery. And he said, yes. And I said, I'm not upset that this happened. I'm upset that you didn't tell me the truth before. I know, Dad. I know that stings, that sting of embarrassment. I know he, in fact, felt a little bit of shame. Gandhi said the truth only hurts if it should. Sometimes that sting is good. When you scrape your knees when you're learning to ride a bike, you start pedaling faster so that you don't scrape your knees again. I'm sure that Ian won't do it again. I do not believe in spanking. I didn't give him any sort of reprimand like that. I merely held up the mirror to his own conscience to show him that he could be better. Lead from the high road unconditionally. Sometimes leaders think, yeah, I know I'm supposed to be a good leader, but you don't understand. This is a really stressed time right now. Or I'm really under the gun because our project is under the gun. So I'm going to be a good leader, but let me get this project done first. Or you don't understand, we've got budget cuts going on. I can't be a good leader right now because we got to get through this cycle of budget cuts. Or we're trying to implement this new system. Do you know how hard that is on people? Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be a good leader, but not now. We start making ourselves conditional. We're like, I'm going to be a better leader when I'm not stressed. We think that we're all one project away from tranquility, which just doesn't happen. You have to learn how to be an unconditionally good leader. Finally, be good to yourself and be good to others. If you're overweight, start working out. If you smoke, stop that nonsense. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself like you actually have personal fidelity and that you care about yourself. Because if you care about yourself, you'll be in a much better position to genuinely, authentically care about others as well. It all comes down to the wolf. You've got it inside of you. You've got the potential to do fantastic things as a leader. The world needs good leaders desperately. So choose to lead from your good wolf. Feed it with goodness, the goodness that already exists inside of you, so that you can do good things for others as well. So now I'm going to put down my slides here, and I think I go back to turning over the screen. Let's see how I do that. Let's see. I'm screen sharing. How do I get out of the screen share? There you go. Hey, all right. Am I back?
You're back. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bill, and go Cubs tonight.
Thank you.
Right. Also joining our webinar today, we will have a Q&A session. We have some industry experts in leadership roles.
Terrific.
Whom I'd like to take just a brief moment and introduce. On your screen from left to right, from Brookfield Global Relocation Services, Angela Griffiths joins us. She's the Director of L&D for Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Hi, Angela.
APAC. Then we have
Hi, Bill.
President of STARA, Mr. Ong Kakwan, who's also the Executive Director at the National Youth Council for Singapore.
Ah, nice to meet you, On.
And Executive Director and CEO of STARA, Robert Yeo.
Robert.
Yeo is also joining us this morning. So
great. Also,
you may notice that we have a number of students and staff from Temasek Polytechnic.
I love it.
You'll see them. So during the remaining time, we'll open things up to questions. First, we'll start with panelists. Those of you who are watching remotely, we have a number on the call live. Feel free to send your questions in to us through the chat box on your screen. So if any of our panelists has a question, we'll turn it over to you.
Terrific.
Okay, so hi, Bill, and thanks very much. That was, I have to say, everything you said definitely resonates. So a terrific presentation. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the questions I have is on seeking feedback. And I have to say that's an area that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with, especially if you know that maybe one of your peers on board with everything that you're doing and how to manage that. And then with your direct reports, how to go about seeking feedback from them, productive outcome.
It's a very good question, and I know that the 360s are very controversial, and some people are not supportive of them. I have found them to be very useful. That said, I do think that the peer feedback in a 360 is the most suspect. It's the one that I discount the most, because there is almost a subconscious competition that goes on between peers. That if we're rated on a bell curve, such as many performance management systems are, then in a tangible way, I am competing against my peers, even if we happen to be very collegial outside or inside of work even. So I agree that peer feedback can be challenging. I can say that executive coaching is extremely useful for feedback. If you have I like this idea that Jim Kouzes told me about. Jim Kouzes got to work with a guy named John Gardner, who I believe was the Secretary of Education under President Johnson in the United States. And he talked about how necessary it is to have a loving critic. It's almost like this chief ego deflator that I talked about. And a coach can be this loving critic in that they're not trying to punish you. What a good person in feedback, whether it be a peer or your spouse or a boss, holds the mirror up so that you can see yourself. That's the job of good feedback, which may help close a blind spot. The challenge is we don't always like the image that we see of that reflection of ourselves. In terms of peer feedback, what I have seen work is the best things that I've seen work are peers that may not be in your same division doing the same jobs as you, but are in a similar role working outside in another company. A lot of people that I know get, well, CE groups, for example, middle managers. I know of succession groups where owners, people that are soon to inherit companies, they got like 12 of them. You have the son of this company, the daughter of this company, the son of this one. They're all getting ready to inherit companies, and they get together as a group facilitated by an outside coach. And they have common conversations about what's going on for them. And they're able to share with one another because they don't work at the same company, but they are at the same level. There's a certain levellessness without competitiveness between them. So they can be more helpful with one another. So I've seen that work. The only other thing that I would say in terms of peer feedback is, you know, there's got to be at least one peer that you've got a good, healthy, productive relationship that isn't competitive, or that they know that you've got their back and you know that they've got their back, and that you make an agreement with one another that you care about each other enough to level with them in ways that other people might not level with them. Make an agreement that after lunch, if either one of you has broccoli in your teeth, that the other person gets to be able to have permission to point it out. That's part of it, is making sure that you give the other person permission to give you the feedback and you'll assure them that you won't get defensive when you get the feedback. So then they'll feel more free to give it to you. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but those are some answers that I've got, Angela. But thank you. It's a good question. What other questions might we have?
All right, yeah. We did an interesting one, came in from Sarah, who was watching live remotely. She asked, she said, you explained about being true to yourself. She said that really resonated with her as well. Once she did receive performance feedback that she was, quote unquote, devoid of emotion. Right? What about situations where you're not on your game, you're not having such a day? She said she asked this because she tends to have the perception, and this could go back to, again, a cultural interpretation of what is professional behavior, showing emotion or restraining the emotion. So be true to yourself. What interpretation would you put in this situation when it comes to showing emotion?
Well, Sarah, I appreciate the question. It takes courage to ask a question like that. First of all, a priest one time told me really, there are two important words that have never left me, and those two words are personal fidelity. This idea of faithfulness to others is extremely important. A lot of times, though, we'll lose faithfulness to ourselves, and personal fidelity matters. And that partly is about taking good care of yourself, and partly about being who you are. My first book is called Right Risk, and it's about risk-taking. And really, it's the early writings I have about courage. And I feel that one of the most courageous things that a human being can do is take a journey through themselves, whether it be through coaching, whether it be through a counselor or a priest or a therapist. But the journey through yourself, I think it needs to be led by someone else genuinely to sort of take you through that experience. But you get through it's like Luke Skywalker going into the cave, and he has to confront the light and darkness of himself. And when you get to the other side of that, you're a more authentic human being, warts and all, meaning that you become embracing and accepting of not just the sunshiny parts of yourself, but also the shadowy parts of yourself that have merit and in fact have usefulness. You don't want to castrate, you don't want to cast those things out of yourself, because you'll lose potency if you do. The thing with the emotion piece that you bring up, you know, let's face it, there are some people that are more expressive of emotion and are much more disclosing of emotion. Maybe some people are even too disclosing of emotion. Overly emotional, some people can be, male or female. And there are some people who are not as comfortable. To me, it comes down to, who are you and what are you genuinely comfortable with? If you're a person that tends to be more reserved and you've been called out on that, I think that you're okay to be yourself. You can make minor adjustments to or if there's a dimension of yourself you haven't experienced and you're starting to feel guilty about that, feeling like maybe you should experience more emotions and that it would add to you as a human being, then in a safe way, you can start to do so if you think you need to. But I also think it's fine. I know some people that are not overly emotional, and I love them. They're fantastic people. I love them for who they are. I know the other too. I know people that are overly emotional that I'm like, I wish they would lay off the emotions. So I think it comes down to partly the biggest thing is, and it's the same. A lot of times I'll give this advice in presentation skills. The advice is you got to be yourself. That's the most important thing that you can be in this life. And it takes a lot of courage to be that self. And it takes a lot of honesty and courage to admit who your real self is, and then even more courage to live that way in the world. I'll give you just a small example from my own life. I'm 54 years old now. I want to be comfortable when I go and work with clients. I now wear shoes that have sneakers on the bottom. So they're professional looking shoes, but they've got sneaker stuff on the bottom. Now somebody might say, well, he's not wearing wingtip shoes anymore. I don't care. I'm 54. I want to be comfortable. It's part of who I am, you know. That's my answer, is personal fidelity. If you're a person who is a bit on the reserved side and you're okay with it, great. If you feel not okay with it, then allow yourself to slowly start to be willing to express some of that emotion more.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Sarah, for that question. I see that the students have some questions, so if you would introduce yourself.
Hey, students, I like it.
Hi, Mr. Bill. Thanks for the insightful sharing. I'm Rick from Temasek Poly. So I have one question for you. Is there any suggestions on what I need to do to be a ego deflator or ego inflator so that I'm not seen as being a fake?
So, so suggestions for being an ego inflator of others?
Yes, or ego deflator.
Yeah. So how to be an ego deflator? That's a good question. You know, I think that the first thing is the motive for doing so, right? Because like I told you, I know my wife loves me. I know my wife cares about me. She wants what's best for me. And she knows an oversized ego is not what's best for me. So she's willing to puncture that ego when it needs to be punctured. But that's because the caring level and the trust level between my wife and I is high. There's plenty of other people who have bludgeoned me with feedback that I didn't ask for or welcome or want from them, and I would reject it. So it partly is connected to the trust level you have for the person that you are going to be a chief ego deflator for, and you need permission from them. And if you don't have permission, you might create an agreement with them that you want to take the relationship that you have with that person to the next level. And that means you'll actually deepen the relationship between the two of you, build greater trust in the long run, if you both have the agreement that you're going to be truth tellers with one another as loving critics, meaning that you'll always have that person's back, and you want to invite it from them too, so that you're doing it in a way that's productive, not in a way that's destructive. It's not about, we certainly don't want to be an ego deflator of somebody else to make us look in a higher position of stature that we're above them because we've now deflated them. It's always got to be as equal to equal and based on caring and trust. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. And look, more student questions. I like hearing from the students. That's great.
That's actually a good segue if you're okay for just a couple more minutes. We have one where Raymond Thomas wrote in, and he's talking about one of the challenges for him is varying leadership styles that are a result of different generations converging in the workplace, which we have at the moment. So good question from our millennials. We have boomers on the line as well as Gen X are here. So what balance would you suggest as relates to that?
Oh man. And I'm an echo boomer. I'm at the tail end of boom, almost close to X. I'm from 1964. Sorry, 62 I am. I'm an echo boomer. Yeah, so in terms of leadership style, a lot, you know, I don't want to say anything and offend any of the elders that I've learned from in leadership, because there's a real giant in the field that has based his whole practice on this idea that you can flex your leadership style. And he offers 4 quadrants, and if you just flex into one and become this leader for this person and this leader for another person. And yet, if you look at the research, and I've looked at some of the longitudinal year-over-year research, like over a 10-year period of time, it's 50-50, that some people are able to flex, but half people can't flex. It's not an easy proposition. You may have a temperament that is a certain leadership way. I remember I think one of the most wise things I ever heard a senior leader say to me, and it was in a coaching session, and he's an executive vice president. And we were talking about how hard leadership is. And I said, why do you think leadership is hard, Tim? And he goes, well, you know, it's all different. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, for this person, they need something from me. And this person needs a totally different leader out of me. And I don't always know which leader I'm supposed to be for which person on any given day. So I've got to become not just one leader, but many different leaders. It's all different. That's always stuck with me, that you know, a leader can be effective and be a very directive and even confrontational and intimidating leader. They can be effective. On the other hand, you can have a leader that has a more of a teacher-like, old mentor, coach kind of approach, and that can be effective. And you know what? Both of those styles can be ineffective too. So it kind of goes back to who are you again. In terms of the generational differences, I think that the big thing is that how is their love of transparency and information. Boomers are like sort of on a need-to-know basis. So yeah, I've got the information. That's what makes me powerful. This information is in my purview, and I will give it to you on a need-to-know basis. And therefore, I get my power as a boomer from that. Not all boomers, but some boomers. Boomers are really bifurcated by the Vietnam War in the United States. Some were against, some were for. And then in the Gen X, and especially millennials, we want more transparency. So you see Julian Assange, and you see Edward Snowden especially come out of the sort of more millennial, because they feel like, hey, there should be no secrets. In fact, I'm going to take the secrets you have and make sure people know these secrets. Boomers did it too. Boomers did it too a little bit with the Pentagon Papers. There have been some other people have done this kind of stuff. So the generation, what I would say about generational differences, we all like to look at the other ones and scratch our head and think the kids these days, they just don't get it, or they don't have the same work ethic that we did. And then the younger generations are going, look at those stale old fossils, always having to toe the party line, doing it just like their fathers did. They just don't get it. We all just don't think the other group gets it. But the truth is we all have value to add. And we can all be learning from each other. We can reverse mentor. I can learn a lot. I just brought a millennial onto the design of a leadership development program for the very reason that I wanted fresh ideas and I wanted to be closer to technology. It's making sure that we're leveraging each other, learning from each other. And I would say to the millennials and maybe the late Gen Xers, but particularly the millennials, I know that the boomers can get frustrating because you can feel like, hey, I don't need to earn it the same way that you did. I don't have to go through this long journey. I got the merit already. I'm smart enough to do this now. Be patient with the boomers to a certain degree, and you don't want to kick them out the door. They've got wisdom to offer. They've fallen in a lot of holes that you can actually benefit from the stripes that they've earned along the way. Although I know it can be frustrating sometimes. So I don't know if this is an answer, but that's my response to the generation question.
There's something to add, Bill. I think the question here is, we tend to say each generation has to reach out to the other, right? But I think the key to that is we all have to be in that space in order to understand how to reach out to each other, not about the thought process of reaching out, but being in that space so that we share the same space and we understand and learn how to then reach out.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Very good. And good question.
Okay, I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, it has caught up with us. Sadly, we need to bring this engaging session to a close. Bill, thank you very much, panelists. And,
thank you, Singapore and Stada. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks, Justin, for all the hard work behind the scenes, and Anton as well. Thanks, everybody.
All right, Chen Hong, thank you for your question as well. All right, to all our viewers out there, thanks for joining today's webinar, brought to you by Stada and the Center for Transcultural Studies at Temasek Polytechnic. Be sure to check out Bill's book, A Leadership Kick in the Ass, and visit Stada's webinar, stada.org.sg, for the archive of our previous webinars. Now, I'd like to end, as I usually do, with a quote from Soren Kierkegaard, which comes to mind when I hear Bill's encouraging words about these moments that come to all of us at some point. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. So on that note, this is Justin Scott signing off from the Global Connect Village at Temasek Polytechnic in Singapore. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.